I'm a little intimidated standing up here, like hovering over everyone, so I might wander around a little bit and come down to everyone's level here. So, but I wanted to start out, I've got a few things to talk about in my own personal life, but I'd like to start out with a story. And it's a story I've never told before. It's a story that will be in my second book. And I've told it to individuals, but never in a crowd. And it's about a patient of mine. His name was Captain Denny. Captain Denny was a United Airlines pilot, and he was quite an accomplished pilot. He was the captain. He had gone through all the ranks, and he was now the captain. He was very accomplished with DC-10s. As a matter of fact, he was known to be one of the experts in the world on DC-10s. And he flew a DC-10, obviously, and he was a trainer for DC-10s. And I saw him in the office one day, and Denny had a cast on his arm. And I said, Denny, what happened to you? How come? And he had some bruises and was banged up a little bit. What happened to you? And he said, well, let me tell you the story. I was traveling back from Stapleton International Airport in Denver. And I wasn't flying. I was just going to get on a commercial airliner. And I picked one that was flying back. And about a half hour into the flight, I heard this bang in the back of the engine, in the back of the airplane, and I knew it was from an engine. And all of a sudden, he felt the plane start to tip to the right. And there's a certain angle that captains and airline pilots know that they can't go beyond a certain angle because people get a little alarmed. And he was going beyond that angle, and he recognized that there was a problem. So he called the stewardess over and said, I'm a captain for this particular airline. I know a lot about it, and I'm a trainer. I just came from a training session. Do you think the captain of the airline that's piloting right now would want to help, get some of my help? And the stewardess went up to the captain, knocked on the door, and all of a sudden she signaled like this. And he walked into the cockpit, and as he walked into the cockpit, he looked around the cabin. And he didn't realize it at the time, but about every other person on the plane would not be alive by the end of that flight. He went into the captain's area, to the cockpit, and he recognized there was a little panic. Now, airline pilots don't like to admit to being panicked, but there was a little panic on the airline pilots' faces. And he said, what happened? And he said, there was an explosion on the number 2 engine, which is the engine, there are 3 engines on the DC-10. The one on the 2 wings are 1 and 3, and the number 2 engine is the one on the back, the very back of the plane. And the engine exploded, and when it exploded, evidently a piece of the fan flew out and severed the hydraulic lines. Now, hydraulic lines are used to steer the plane. So he looked initially, because he knew he was an expert on this particular plane. And he looked at the controls, and he saw there are 3 controls for hydraulic lines. The ship is amazing. It's got triple backup, so that if one hydraulic system goes down, you have 2 others. If 2 go down, you have 1 other. He looked at the gauges. The hydraulic system number 1, 0. Hydraulic system number 2, 0. Hydraulic system number 3, 0. There was no hydraulic system. What had happened was, they found out later, that a piece of this engine had flown off and cut 3 hydraulic lines, which were together at the back of the plane. There were no hydraulics on the plane. Denny tells me that at that point, he said to himself, I'm going to die today, because they couldn't steer the plane. They couldn't land the plane. There was no landing gear. There's no steering. And so he didn't know what to do. But it's interesting, he is a trainer for this particular plane, and they were training in Denver the day before this happened. And guess what they were training on? Hydraulic systems. What a coincidence. So he knew what to do with hydraulic systems, but he had never trained on one with no hydraulic systems at all. So what he decided to do, and he took over the piloting of the plane, because he was one of the world experts in this particular plane, and they all recognized that. So he decided to gun the right engine if he wanted to go to the left. If he wanted to go to the right, he would gun the left engine. If he wanted to go down, he would throttle back on both engines. If he wanted to go up, he would throttle up. And so they made their way across the country, going up and down, and they did some 360s, and the crew and the people in the plane were wondering what was going on, and they finally told them what was happening. they decided to attempt a landing at Sioux City, Iowa. Okay? And so he's going up and down, no landing gear, no way to steer the plane. He could only steer the plane by gunning the engines or cutting back on the engines. And I said to Denny, how did you happen to pick this one plane to fly on when you had a number of planes you could choose? And he said, well, it's interesting that you asked that question, because when I was walking down the terminal, there were 2 planes that were taking off that day for Chicago, and I could have picked any one because I had the right to get on any plane I wanted to. And he said the first one was leaving, and it was one of the first in the terminal. And then the next one was way down at the end of the terminal, leaving at a later date. And I said, well, which one did you pick? And he said, I don't know why, but I picked the one farther down. I walked right past the one that was leaving early that would have gotten me to Chicago earlier, and I walked down the terminal to get to this other plane, which was this particular plane that he was flying on. What a coincidence, or you can call it divine intervention or whatever you call that he picked that particular plane. There's a number of, he said, you know, when I asked him, he said it was coincidence, divine intervention, I don't know what it was, but I ended up on this plane that left later and was farther away than the one I could have picked. So he was on the plane, they decided to land at Sioux City, Iowa, and he was gunning the plane up and down and up and down. Finally, he was able to get close to the runway, and he was going about 300 miles an hour, and he put it down, and there was no landing gear, so he had to land it on the belly of the plane. The plane caught on fire. It skidded off the runway. Fortunately, it had just rained the night before. The ground was muddy. It was farm fields around it, and they skidded into the corn. And he remembers thinking how high the corn is because he saw the corn going past the cockpit. Well, actually, what happened is the nose of the plane broke off and was sticking down like this. The plane caught on fire. 111 people were killed on the plane instantly when that landed. But he saved 185 people. Had he not been flying that plane, 185 people would have been killed. Because when they radioed back to the main, there's a main place in San Francisco that handles these kinds of disasters. When they radioed back and told them that the hydraulics were gone on the ship, they suddenly were quiet because they realized that they were talking to dead men, that no one could land a plane with no hydraulics. He landed the plane successfully. 180 people lived. He lived with a broken arm, some scratches, and this landing was heralded as one of the greatest feats in aviation history. The date, July 19th, 1989, is remembered by every pilot in history of aviation. That's the day that he landed the plane successfully. And the coincidences of having him walk down the run to the terminal, to the plane that was farthest away, was very interesting to me. And I think that was more than just a coincidence. I wanted to tell you about myself a little bit and how I got into this craziness of writing a book. Anyone here write a book? How long does it take to write a book? I thought I'll do this in 6 months. I'll finish this in 6 months. Everyone that's written the book's laughing at me. Ultimately, it takes about 4 years. I took 4 years to write this book, and I'm an ordinary doc. I see regular patients. I do anything from diarrhea to heart attacks. So whatever comes to the door, I take care of. I have some unusual hobbies. I thought I was pretty boring, but we do some crazy things, and people accuse me of liking big things, okay? So here's one of the first big things we liked. This is the Sycamore Pumpkin Festival. We won it 2 years running with the largest pumpkin. We grew it in our backyard with lots of birth control pills and various things that we added to the soil, which is probably toxic. And so that's the crowd, my little crowd there, my family. And we fly big kites. There's our kite, and I think that's my daughter there. So that's a whale kite. It's actually the size of a small blue whale. And so that's also one of our big things. We, however, got a small dog. This is Gracie, and she's a small dog until she grew. and now she goes along with the bigness of everything that we seem to do. There's my big family, And this is at Jordan's wedding. This is Jordan here. She got married to this guy here, Eric, and they're happily married, and that's the whole crowd. We have 7 kids. I'm not sure where they all came from. We've got some adopted and some not adopted, but I'm not sure which ones are which anymore. And that was our wedding in our backyard. And so that's our big family. We enjoy vacations. How many of you have been to Cape Cod, Massachusetts? What do you like about Cape Cod? Anyone?
Beaches.
Beaches, food, yeah, ambience, everything. When my parents, I was an only child. I know I'm very spoiled. And when I was a kid, my parents would love to go on vacations, and I loved vacations. And I can remember some of the vacations that we took. And these were days when there weren't expressways and air conditioning. And I'll never forget a vacation to Yellowstone. And I can remember, although I can't remember saying, "Are we there yet, Dad? Are we there yet?" But I can remember going into one of the cabins there. And my mother went into the bathroom. In those days, bears would be all over the place, you know, and you could feed the bears all kinds of junk food and so forth. I'm sure it's very unhealthy, and they can't do that anymore. But in those days, you could. And I'll never forget my mother going into the bathroom, and this was a bathroom that had no doors. You just kind of wandered through a maze and get into the bathroom. And about 2 seconds after she got into the bathroom, I saw her running out as fast as I've ever seen her run, and there was a black bear chasing her. We had lots of fun on vacations, and one of the most memorable vacations I can remember was our trip to Cape Cod with our whole family. Now, it's interesting that when Dad pays for the vacation, all the kids seem to like to come, and we had 7 kids and grandkids and everyone else come to Cape Cod with us, and we go to a little town, Eastham, which is right about here. Eastham is right there, and that's where we go to the beach right there. And you know, have you ever had one of those days that's just a perfect day where everything is just happened to be incredibly right? The whole family was having fun. The beach was great. The sun and everything was just perfect, and we had a wonderful day. And on vacation, the boys tend to cook. So we boys, and we cook pretty well, actually. We can do more than boil water. And we decided to have a real special dinner that night. We had swordfish on the grill, and we had corn on the cob, and all kinds of wonderful things. And we went to the store. There were some pies. There was a whole stack of pies. They were cherry pies, and we bought 5 because that's how many we needed for that one dinner for as many people as we had. And we got to talking. The boys got to talking about the kinds of pies that they loved and the most special pie that they can think of. My mother used to make a rhubarb pie. We had one rhubarb plant in the backyard that was huge, about the size of this podium. And she would, at the end of the year, would pick all the stalks and make a rhubarb pie that was extra sweet and really, really delicious. And we thought that was our favorite pie. And we thought, my mother had died by the time this vacation took place. We thought if my mother was around, she'd make us a rhubarb pie for that night, and that would be very special. And it was one of those nights again, the kids were running around chasing bugs, and the girls were laughing, and the boys were cooking, and it was just, you know, you had to pinch yourself. You remember certain things in your life, you know, certain days that are so special that you'll never forget them the rest of your life. And this was one of those days. It was just, you know, we're big family people. It's just one of those incredible family events. And so we had the dinner, and the swordfish was delicious, and the corn on the cob was good, I must say, even though we cooked it ourselves, it was really, really good. And then my wife served the cherry pie, and I took one bite and I got goosebumps in the back of my neck. Because the cherry pie wasn't cherry, it was rhubarb. I looked at the box said cherry pie. They all said cherry pie, but this was rhubarb, sweet rhubarb pie. And I got to thinking, maybe, just maybe, there's something about this special day that my mother was enjoying with us. And we had a rhubarb pie, and that was her way of saying that I'm here enjoying this special event with you. And that got me to thinking about spiritual kinds of things. And but then after a while, you get busy and you kind of drop that thought. But then I was working on the wards one day, and Steve Heim came up to me. Dr. Heim. Anyone have Dr. Heim for a back surgeon? Dr. Heim's a local back surgeon. And he said, I've got a story to tell you, Scott. And I said, okay, tell it to me. And he said, we were skiing with my wife and my wife's sister out in Colorado. And it was a wonderful time. He's an expert skier. He's quite an athlete. He can do 1,000 push-ups and 1,000 sit-ups, which is about 1,000 more than I can do. So he's an expert skier. They went up to this mountain that they'd never skied on before. And he said it was a great day, except all of a sudden there's a blizzard that hit. And they got to the top of the mountain, the blizzard hit. The temperature dropped about 40 degrees. The wind was coming like crazy. The snow was coming down and up and around and everywhere. You could hardly see anything where they were going. So they got their skis out at the top of the mountain and had to ski down. So they started skiing down. They got about halfway down. There was a grove of trees in the middle of the run, and they had to go to the right or the left. Now, Steve went to the right and assumed, I hate to say this, but he's a surgeon. He assumed that everyone would follow him. I'm an internist. I can make those jokes, and they joke about us too, us internists. And the girls didn't see him go to the right, and they went to the left. Well, as soon as Steve realized that, he decided to ski back through the grove of trees, and he's an expert skier. There's 5 feet of powder snow, and he's skiing through the grove of trees. And all of a sudden, he got this funny feeling in his chest, like there was something really seriously happening that he couldn't understand. And everything became quiet. Despite the snow blowing and the wind and everything else, it was silent. And he could hear his breath, and he could hear the crunch of snow under his skis. And he didn't know what to do, so he stopped. He stopped skiing. Now, he had no idea why. He knew the girls were waiting for him on the other side of the grove of trees. He had no idea why he stopped skiing, but he stopped skiing. He took off his skis. And then he did something very strange, and he said, I don't know why I did this. He started to walk up the hill. And he said, I'm not sure why I was walking up the hill, but I had this compulsion to walk up the hill. And the girls are waiting for me in the opposite direction. So I'm walking and climbing and walking up the mountain, and he came to a large pine tree. Now, if you're familiar with snow, it makes kind of a well underneath the tree, and then it goes down to the base of the tree, and then comes up like this to the 5 feet of snow that was around that day. And he looked down at the well and suddenly realized why he was there. Underneath the tree was a body covered in snow. Now, Steve's a trauma surgeon. What better person to happen to find a body in a remote area of the mountain than a trauma surgeon? So he thought the person must have hit the tree because he couldn't see it with the snow coming down. So he brushed the snow off his face to see if he was alive, and he looked like he was dead. Steve's seen dead people, we all have, and he looked like he had a gray face and looked like he was dead. But he's a trauma surgeon, so he knew what to do. He reached down for the carotid artery to see if he had a pulse, and sure enough, he had a pulse. He had a thready pulse. It was very weak, but he was alive. So he went into trauma mode. He put his head down, he brushed the snow off, he covered him with his 2 jackets, and he started yelling for help. Help! Help! One of the last skiers down the mountain heard his cry for help, came to his side, and Steve said, go call the snow patrol, the ski patrol, as soon as you can, and get him up here. And about 15 minutes later, there was a gurney being pulled by a snowmobile, and they loaded the unconscious skier that was hypothermic and shocky and almost dead onto the gurney and took him down to the lodge where the ambulance was waiting and took him off to the hospital. By this point, Steve was shaking like this with adrenaline and cold, put his jackets back on, skied back to where the girls were still waiting for him, and they skied down the mountain. In the lodge, he was given a reward, a cup of hot chocolate for his efforts. And I said, Steve, what do you think about that? And he said, well, I called the hospital the next day to see how this guy was doing, and they said he was alive and well. He was awake, alert. Steve had splinted his leg in the field with some of his underclothes and a branch from the tree. And the orthopedic surgeons were impressed with his splinting because he had done a great job. They didn't have to reset the bone at all. It was a perfect job. And so he never knew the name of this person. He didn't know who he was, except that he found out later he was a plumber from one of the towns in Colorado. And I said, well, what do you think happened there, Steve? And he said, I think I was directed by something from above because I just don't know why I felt compelled to climb up that mountain. And he said to me something strange. He said, 2 people were saved that day. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, the skier was saved, but I was saved too. And I said, why? He said, 2 years ago, my father and I were skiing in Michigan. We were cross-country skiing, and my father was an expert skier, and he rested on the slope. And he had a heart attack. And I ran down to the first aid station, which was fairly close, about 10 minutes away. And Steve, being a strong guy, actually put his father on his shoulder and ran him literally down the mountain. And there they did CPR on him for about an hour. And he died. He didn't make it. And Steve said, I've been dealing with that guilt of not being able to save my father for 2 years, and it's been terrible. I've been unable to function very well because of that guilt. And he said, when I found this skier under the tree, I think that was my second chance. I think there was something upstairs, he said to me, that was giving me a second chance. And that skier, since I saved that skier, I realized that I really wasn't in charge of life and death, that someone else was in charge of life and death. And that by being able to save that skier, I realized that I really could do that. I could save someone. And my guilt disappeared. And I said, do you think your father was in on this scheme? And he said, I'm convinced he was, that he put me in that place and directed me to the unconscious skier that had hit the tree. So 2 people were saved that day, Dr. Heim and the skier. Well, when I heard that story, I began to think, I wonder if other doctors have stories like this. This is an amazing story. Because doctors don't talk about that. You know what doctors talk about? Serum potassiums, your gallbladder, who threw up in their office, what my golf score was, although most of us don't have time to play golf because we're busy doctors. And so I decided to hang out in the doctor's lounge. Now, anyone been in the doctor's lounge before? What's in a doctor's lounge?
Not much. Coffee.
Coffee. Wonderful things. Donuts, coffee, chips, some sandwiches sometimes, things like that. So all the candy, all the good things that doctors like to eat when you don't see them. And so I started to hang out in the doctor's lounge early in the morning, about 5 o'clock, and I started to ask doctors if they had any stories that they couldn't explain scientifically. And I was amazed the number of doctors that had amazing stories. And again, we don't talk about these things to each other. And so many of the doctors decided to share those stories with me. And I'm not sure why they decided to share those stories, because these are conservative, ordinary doctors. These are doctors that you go to, and I suspect in the book, there's on the back page, there's a list of the doctors that contributed stories. And I suspect that many of you have gone to some of those doctors, and they're pretty conservative. And they, I think, were afraid to share these stories because they were afraid that people would think they were crazy. As a matter of fact, one doctor, Dave Mokel, anyone have Dave Mokel for total joint surgery? Dave Mokel's a total joint orthopedic surgeon, and he said to me, you can't tell anyone this, because I never told this story to anyone else. They'll think I'm crazy. And so I think the doctors shared their stories with me because they had an overarching ideal. And most doctors, I call them in the book, sappy do-gooders. I think most doctors want to do good in the world every day, and I think the overarching reason that they shared these stories with me is they wanted people to realize there's something else out there, and that there is hope in this world, and that there's something that looks out for us, and you can decide what that is for yourself. I think this is a great venue here at the Theosophical Society. So I'm not pushing any religion, but I realized when the doctors came to me, they were all different religions, and some had no religion at all. But they all felt the hand of something that's higher than us, that touched their lives. And I think they wanted everyone to realize that. And I think that's why they shared these stories and risked their careers because of the potential backlash. Fortunately, none of us have had any backlash. Everyone has been kind of heralded as a hero for sharing these stories, because invariably when I tell these stories to people, they tell me their own story. And I think every one of us has had a story, something like this, or every family has had stories that you can't quite explain scientifically. One of my good friends, John Mendenhall, is also an orthopedic surgeon, and he had an interesting happenstance. He was, I think, in a divorce. He was at a real low time in his life, and he tells me he was contemplating the value of his life, and he was sitting in his office, and all of a sudden his nurse came in with a plaque. And the plaque was dropped off by someone anonymously just in his office, and he didn't know why. And he opened the package, and the plaque was his genealogy. All of his relatives, and the genealogy went, it's like a tree. You know how you've seen those genealogy trees. And he was at the bottom of the tree. And he realized that this person, they finally found out who it was. And the person that dropped it off was not even a close friend. It was just an acquaintance. He had worked with him in church a little bit, but he wasn't wasn't a close friend. And he spent the incredible amount of time producing this incredible plaque with his genealogy. And he realized then that he was at the bottom of this tree, and everyone in there was counting on him to do something special to carry on the tradition of their family. And after that, he said, that changed my life. And I decided to go on, and he became an incredibly successful surgeon, orthopedic surgeon, and did some very fine, detailed hand and arm work, especially related to trauma. And he said that plaque from Dave Adams, who was the person that dropped it off, literally saved his life. And about 4 or 5 years later, he was really busy and operating, and it was a Saturday, and he had been busy all week, and he was on call, and he was up half the night before. And he was anxious to get off call, so he handed the pager off to some of his friends, finished his rounds, and decided to go to the doctor's lounge, again the doctor's lounge, and get a Coke or some kind of soda. And he, for some reason, as he was passing the doctor's lounge, he forgot to go in. And he went to his car and then realized, oh, I should have gone to the doctor's lounge to get a Coke. Well, I know a close gas station nearby. I'll just drive to the gas station and get a Diet Coke or whatever he was drinking at the time at the gas station. Well, as he went by the gas station, he forgot to turn in because he was thinking about his patients again. Pager was off, everything was quiet. And he decided, well, I'll just go home. My home is off the next expressway exit, and I'll go home. I've got a whole refrigerator full of cold pop, and I'll stop at home and do that. Well, for the first time ever, and he's never done this before, he went past the exit. He said, that was really strange. He said, I must have been incredibly tired or something because I've never passed my exit before. And he thought to himself, well, I know another hospital that I never go to because they never have the instruments that I need to do these real technical surgeries, but I'll stop there because they've got a great physician's lounge. So he was able to pull off the expressway and saw the white building from the hospital, and for some reason the physician's lounge in the back of the hospital, and he pulled up to the front of the hospital. And he said, I've never done that before. I always go to the back of the hospital. I know where the physician's lounge is, but he felt compelled to go to the front of the hospital, and he got out of the car and walked inside. All of a sudden, this lady comes running up to him and hugs him, and he says, Dr. Mendenhall, thank you for responding. And he thought, what do you mean responding? He had no cell phone, no pager. No one had called him. He said, we've been trying to get a hold of you for the last hour. Thank you for coming. And he said, that's okay. And who was it? It was John. It was the person that had given Dave Adams' daughter, Judah Staten, was the daughter of the person that had given him the plaque 5 years ago that had literally saved his life. And so she said, Dr. Mendenhall, I know you're the only one that can fix my daughter. And he said, what happened to your daughter? And he said, she was in an accident, a zip line broke, and she fell off the zip line. Did you ever think about that? I've never done a zip line, but after hearing the story, I don't think I'm going to do a zip line. And she broke both forearms, both bones, radius and ulna, in both forearms. And the mom said she wants to be a concert pianist. And so they told her in the ER after this accident she'd never play the piano again. And she said to Dr. Mendenhall, I know you're the only one that could fix him. That's the kind of surgery you do. And Dr. Mendenhall said, oh, I'm very sorry, but this is a hospital I never operate on because they don't have the equipment and the tools that I need to do these very particular surgeries. You need to send her to the university. All of a sudden, the head nurse came up and said, Dr. Mendenhall, you won't believe what we did. Last week we had a meeting at the surgical committee, and we decided to encourage people like you to come to this hospital more. So we ordered some special instruments and equipment that you like to use. And it just came in this morning. By that point, Mendenhall realized he was just holding on to the Ferris wheel and had no chance to get out of this. And so he said, I'll take a look at her. And he went to the emergency room, and there she was with both forearms that were broken and hanging lifeless. And it was just a terrible accident. So he said, I'll take her on. I'll do her. He was exhausted from the night before and for the whole week of surgery. But he took her on. And he said the surgery went incredibly fast. He said, I've never done a surgery that fast. The bones seemed to just fall into place. In 45 minutes, he was done with one arm. I was opening the other arm, finished that in 45 minutes, and she was done. By the time she was done, the family was waiting for him because they knew he would finish early. He said, how did you know I'd finish so early? And they said, we just knew. And guess who was there? Dave Adams, the person that had sent him the plaque. It was the grandfather. Well, you're wondering what happened to Judah Staten and her piano playing. Well, she took a lot of time to recover from this surgery. This is a very difficult surgery. And she took about a year to get physical therapy. And then Dr. Mendenhall got a postcard in the mail. And the postcard said, you're cordially invited to the concert of Judah Staten her opening concert in the piano. And she indeed wanted to become a concert pianist, and this was her first concert. He went to the concert, and he said to me, "She played like an angel." So he realized then that he was directed to do all this, and that things just fell into place. Why he missed all the exits, why he went to the hospital, went to the front door versus the back door, all those things seemed to be, and then the instrument, the icing on the cake was when the head nurse came up to him with the instruments that they just ordered and delivered that morning, just the time for her to be operated. So he said there was something to that I just couldn't explain. Now, I learned in talking with docs, again, doctors are pretty superficial in general, from my experience. But I learned something in talking to doctors. And anyone have John Showalter, hand surgeon? John Showalter is a local hand surgeon. And John told me, in telling these stories, that he wanted to get into hand surgery at the University of Iowa. He went to the University of Iowa as a medical student. He loved it there. It's a great school. It's a great medical school. He wanted to do his residency there. And medical school is 4 years, and then residency is for orthopedic surgery is about 5 years. So you do your residency, and then you're an orthopedic surgeon. And he wanted to, after his medical school stay, he wanted to do orthopedic surgery at University of Iowa. But he didn't get in. Now, John's a bright guy. That was kind of unusual that he wouldn't get into University of Iowa where he wanted to go. But he did get into the University of Indiana. It was very interesting because University of Indiana had an interesting program. The only 2 schools in the nation had a program like this, and it was called microsurgery. Anyone know what microsurgery is? Yeah, what is it? It's what?
I'm sorry, I can't define it. Isn't it when you're working under a microscope?
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's the definition. You're working under a microscope, and what they can do with microsurgery is sew little tiny veins and little tiny arteries and little tiny muscles together, where you couldn't do that in a conventional way because you couldn't see them. And you couldn't see to sew together a little tiny artery that was just almost invisible to the naked eye. So we learned how to do that technique. And there were only 2 schools in the nation that were offering that. And Iowa wasn't. Indiana was. And when he got to Indiana, he said that was the greatest disappointment in my life, that I had to go to Indiana and not to Iowa. And then he got involved with microsurgery. And he said, I loved it. That's my goal in life, to be a microsurgeon. And he was. And he said, in retrospect, that was the greatest blessing in my life, to have that disappointment and then to get into microsurgery. And it's interesting that he then, after he had graduated, decided to take on microsurgery to sew on severed body parts. And that hadn't been done before. There were a few people in the country in the 70s that had sewn on hands and fingers and things like that, but that wasn't done. When you cut off your hand, that was too bad. So he had the ability as a microsurgeon to do that. Well, there was a kid, an 18-year-old kid, it gets younger and younger, these 18-year-olds, in Lisle, that was working in a factory and took a skill saw and ran it through his forearm. I hate when that happens. And his hand fell off, literally. And he went to the emergency room because they put the hand in plastic on ice and ran to the emergency room. They stopped the bleeding. And the ER knew of John Showalter's reputation because he was a microsurgeon, and no one else in the Chicagoland area was, because he had special training. So they called him up and said, I've got a guy here in our ER that has lost his hand. Would you be willing to take him on and try to sew his hand back? Well, he said, I've never done that before, but I'd be willing to try. And it hadn't been done in the Chicagoland area or Illinois at all. So he said, send him over. And they sent the 18-year-old kid over. They put him to sleep at CDH, Central DuPage Hospital. And they started the surgery. It took 17 hours to finish the surgery. Can you imagine? Well, in surgery that long, you get up, you go to the bathroom, and the hospital supplied the food. I think it was like 18 boxes of pizzas for all the different crowds and crews and so forth. And people kept looking into the operating room because this was a landmark surgery. This had never been done before in this area. And he finished the surgery, and he said to me, when I got done, I could get blood to the hand, but I had trouble getting blood from the hand. So we worked on that for a while with different blood thinners, and finally was able to do that. And he slept that night in the hospital because he was really worried about this guy's hand. And it was a viable hand. And the guy lived, and the hand became viable. And he had, again, a lot of physical therapy. And then after a couple of years, he had a complaint to Dr. Showalter. And the kid's complaint was, Dr. Showalter, when I play football and catch a football, sometimes my hand's numb. And Showalter said, that's too bad. He had a viable hand, Dr. Showalter, and he continued to do those kinds of technical surgeries throughout his career. And he loved it, and he became very successful and very famous for that. And again, he said to me, that was the greatest disappointment in not getting into the school that he wanted to was the greatest blessing. And he said, someone was guiding me into the area that I needed to be, and they knew that if I was at Iowa, I would never have done this for a career. The kid that sawed his hand off would never have a hand to use again. And so he said there was some force, something that guided me, that got me to Indiana and not to Iowa. Well, I talked to lots of docs, and one of the doctors that I like to talk to is John Heitzler. Anyone have familiar with John Heitzler? Or anyone have a baby delivered by him? Jack Heitzler? Yeah. Jack delivered 2 of our kids, and they actually still talk and walk. So I know him quite well. And Jack had a bunch of kids. We have 7 kids. I think he beat us with 8. And when they were delivering, Joan is his wife, and they're delivering Joan's 5th child, everything went pretty well. And you know, when you're a doc and everyone's, you know, you're not the doctor in charge. Everyone tries to be real careful and extra care and so forth. So he's in the OR or the delivery room with his wife. His partner's delivering the baby. Everyone's running around, and then Grandma O'Hanlon was Joan's grandmother. Grandma O'Hanlon's a midwife, okay, and you've got these high-powered gynecologists and obstetricians in the delivery room. Well, Grandma O'Hanlon, the midwife, walks in and saves Joan's life. And the story goes something like this. Grandma O'Hanlon was from Ireland, and she came to this country, and she decided to become a midwife, and she wanted to help others because she was very spiritual and wanted to do as much good as she could in the world. And so she would deliver babies, and if the people couldn't afford to pay, she'd stay with them regardless. And she said, that's just my job. And so she was quite a midwife, and when she got older and couldn't deliver babies anymore, she went to live with Joan's mother, Joan Heitzler's mother. And Joan would say, if I could make it to Grandma O'Hanlon's lap if I was in trouble, I know I'd be safe. And so Joan and Grandma O'Hanlon became very, very close. They had a loving relationship that was incredible. And when Joan was delivering the baby came out just fine, but afterwards they had to do some exploring, and it was very painful. So Joan decided that she wanted to get some anesthesia. And the anesthesia at the time was called trilene. Now, anyone ever hear of trilene? Trilene's an anesthesia it's a mask that you put on and you breathe. It's a gas, and you breathe it in and you become unconscious. And then when the procedure's over, you take the mask off and you wake up very shortly thereafter. It was a very popular anesthetic at the time. And so they decided to use trilene to put Joan to sleep so she could have this procedure. Well, as they were about ready to do that, Grandma O'Hanlon walks in the room. She stands at the foot of the bed, I should say, and shook her head like this. Joan, don't do it. And so Joan pushed the trilene away. She had no idea what Grandma O'Hanlon's purpose for that. And Grandma O'Hanlon was dressed in her typical polka dot dress with a sweater vest and her hair up in a bun, and little old lady shoes. And so Joan pushed the trilene away. Well, no one realized that Joan had eaten a large meal just before she went into labor. And what happens when you eat a large meal and go into labor? You're a medical person. She vomited. Within about a minute of pushing that trilene mask away, she vomited the entire meal up. Had she been unconscious with the mask on, she might have aspirated and might have died. And Joan says that she made it to Grandma O'Hanlon's lap one last time, their love transcending all time and eternity, because Grandma O'Hanlon had died 22 years before. I got the same emotion when I heard that story. And when I hear these stories from the docs, I would hear the story from the doc in the doctor's lounge or wherever, and I would make a note, and if it gave me goosebumps or brought me to tears, I knew that was a good story, and I'd say to the doc, I want to talk with you about that story. Let me call you tonight, and they'd give me their number, and I'd call them that night and get some more details of the story. So that one was one of my favorites. That just touched me, and still chokes me up a little bit to think about the love that transcended all time and eternity. Now, my daughter Lucci is a choir singer, and she also is in show choir. Anyone know what show choir is? What's show choir?
Where you do performances live.
Yeah, live performances, singing and dancing. So all these girls, and sometimes they have girls and boys, but in her show choir group, it was all girls, perform singing and dancing, and it's kind of hard. I've tried to do that, and you get puffy, you get, and how can you sing when you're puffy? But I guess they're in better shape than I am, and so they were in the show choir, and they had a special competition in Onalaska, Wisconsin, which is about 4 or 5 hours away. So Lucci left on the bus with her show choir group from the Wheaton-Warrenville South High School, and they got about halfway there, and then we left about an hour after they had left. And I got a call from Lucci, and she said, "Oh, Dad, there was just a little fire in the bus, but it's okay, and we're fine now, and don't worry about it." And she sounded a little funny, but I didn't ask her any more details, and she said, "We're just fine. I just want to let you know." And so about an hour later, when we were caught up to the bus, we saw all these sirens and lights and police cars and fire trucks, and we passed, and there we saw this. It was a burning bus. That was Lucci's bus. The entire bus burned up. And evidently what happened was the tire in the back of the bus, Lucci was sitting in the back of the bus, the tire in the back of the bus blew up. And the friction caused a fire. As soon as they realized that, the bus driver drove off the exit and parked, and all the kids started to file out. Well, the fire started to get hotter and hotter and surrounded the bus. The girls couldn't get out fast enough, and they started to scream. And the bus filled with smoke, and the heat from the flames was on the bottom of the bus. And the girls were burning their feet because it was so hot. And Lucci was toward the back, and it was like a giant flaming coffin that was going up. And the kids that were in the bus behind them took that picture. And all of a sudden, the girls couldn't get out fast enough. And all of a sudden, the girls in the back of the bus, in the second bus, said that there was something it was like a hand that went over the bus, and the flames died down for enough time to allow every single girl to jump off the bus. When the last girl jumped off the bus, there was a roar from the back of the bus of flames that came through the bus and incinerated everything and burned everything in the bus, and that's what it looked like. But every girl was able to get off the bus safely. Everything was destroyed except the girls. When we heard that, we knew that there was something miraculous that happened that day to allow those girls to be saved. And that was such an incredible event. By about 2 o'clock in the morning, everyone had gotten a second bus and had gotten to the hotel where we were waiting. And the choir director, who was young and inexperienced, said to us, the show was supposed to go on at 11 o'clock the next day. We had nothing. We had no clothes, we had no shoes, we had no costumes, we had nothing. And she said, "We're going to perform." I thought, she's crazy. That's 8 hours from now. We've got nothing. So all of a sudden, everyone went into high gear. The principal, Dave Claypool from Wheaton-Warrenville South, went to the high school because he had the keys, and there were 52 girls. They found 26 costumes at the high school that were old in some storage area, and they decided to bring them up to Onalaska, and they did. The next morning, they found, guess how many costumes in Onalaska High School? 26 costumes to make 52. And they were interestingly similar. One was purple and one was silver. You'll see them. We'll show them to you in a minute. And they looked almost identical to the costumes. Each costume looked almost identical. My wife was in charge of costuming. She's a seamstress. And so she was working like crazy, getting duct tape and pins and needles and all the kinds of things to get the costumes to fit. And by about 10:30, we're going on 11, about 10:30, they had gotten ready. They had gotten all the underclothes, all the stuff from the different Walmarts and different stores, and the costumes were fitted. Now they tried in the room where they were before they went on stage. They tried to do some of the exercise and so forth, and some of the tops fell off the girls. So my wife got some more duct tape, clear duct tape, duct taped the costumes together, and they went on. It's interesting that they had no shoes. So what happened was, as they were getting all this stuff ready, people would come into the room and say, "Take my shoes," and they would take off their shoes. One of the women in the room said, "This must be what heaven's like," because people were so generous and incredible that they had dozens and dozens of shoes, enough shoes. They weren't matching, but they had enough shoes to go on and for the concert. And they sang, and there was not a dry eye in the whole audience of these kids that were singing. And they sang an interesting song about tragedy and overcoming adversity, which had been picked long before. It was interesting that that was the song that they had sung. Let's play it. I'll let you hear it. This is the actual performance of my daughter and her class. Everything will be all right. Everything will be all right. It'll just take some time. Interesting song. Well, they were incredible. And then they had the final award ceremony. And they announced the third place winner wasn't us, second place winner wasn't us, first place winner wasn't us. And the girls were resigned. They knew that they did the best they could. Even though they didn't win, they performed to the best of their ability, and everyone thought they were incredible. Well, then, all of a sudden, somebody came on stage with this trophy that was about 5 feet high, and they announced there was a grand champion award we didn't know about. And guess who won? Wheaton Warrenville South. We won the grand champion award. We took everything. So, interesting thing, everyone that was there, all the parents knew that there was something special that happened to save their girls from being destroyed and from being burned in that incredible fire. And they were all saved, and not one was injured or one was hurt at all. Everyone in this room, everyone that's listening, everyone has had tough times or is going through tough times. And I think doctors that had told me these stories wanted people to realize that there are miracles that happen out there that are strange and wonderful, and that there's something that's higher than us that looks out for us. Dr. Mendenhall with Judith, Dr. Showalter and his hand surgery, who had a young man that would be able to operate and use his hand the rest of his life. There are coincidences that are in our lives, and I'd like you to be more aware after this talk of the coincidences that occur in your life, those both small and large. There's an elevator meeting, a telephone call, things that happen. You look in the website, and you realize that there's something that you needed to be guided to do that day or that week. And don't ignore those things, and realize that those coincidences may not just be coincidental. I think the doctors wanted us to realize that love is a powerful force, and maybe the most powerful force in the universe. It changes lives. It can overcome adversity. It can overcome everything. It can overcome time and eternity, as in Grandma Hanlon's case. Most doctors felt that God is love. My hope, and the hope of 30 doctors that had contributed to this book, is that we all come away knowing that there is something higher than us, that there is a Creator that knows us personally, and in our darkest hour, we can count on that person, that force to look out for us and to help us out in strange and wonderful ways. That He actively participates in His life. And all we need to do is open our eyes and open our hearts to recognize His hand in our lives. And that's the physician's untold story. Thank you.
I think I know the answer to the question, but now with the success of your book and the interest in your book, are doctors beating on your door to get in the next book? Are they willing to tell their story more now that you've opened that door?
I think they are. Yeah, I've had more doctors tell me stories, and nurses now are coming to me with stories, which is kind of cool because I think nurses have some of the more interesting stories than doctors even. So yes, and we're working on the second book. And the other thing we're working on is a production company from New York has come to us. They've read the book and they like it, and they've done some filming. And we're now going around to networks to see who would be interested in doing a television series on the book. So if any of you know anyone that's in the medical area that has stories, I'm interested in stories for the next book and also for the potential television series. It's interesting, you know, that the doctors were really, really nervous about having this book come out because these are ordinary docs just like I am. They deal with, you know, ordinary people that have ordinary illnesses. And this is something that's a little bit beyond the ordinary. And they were really afraid that people would think that they were a little bit on the strange side, because there are some strange doctors out there. And these doctors that are in the book are pretty ordinary docs. They're doctors I go to, my wife goes to. We send our kids to these people for their orthopedic stuff. And so it was interesting when we launched the book at CDH. They were a little bit on edge about what would happen, and they were actually regarded as heroes. And everyone applauded their ability and their willingness to share these incredible stories. Because again, when I talk to my patients about some of these stories, invariably people come back to me and say, "Oh yeah, now can I tell you my story?" And almost everyone has a story that you can't explain, or their family has a story you can't explain of something that has happened to them that indicates there's something else out there. And so what happened is the doctors, by coming out with these stories, were praised by the people that now feel that they can come out with their stories too. And so I think it's generated a whole new level of understanding and interest in sharing your spiritual stories that we'd never talked about before.
I'm just curious if you would consider reaching out to other physicians in other countries, because I just happened to finish a book called Do No Harm by Henry Marsh, who was a neurosurgeon in Great Britain. And let's see, he was born in 1960. He's still living, but he talks in terms of how difficult some of the decisions are. And it's really a heartfelt story. But I wonder if someone were to ask him, what else? You know, I think that sometimes, like you said, there's things that people don't talk about until they're asked, and then they sleep on it and they think, wow,
yeah,
there's opportunity.
This book has about 30 stories from mostly local doctors. So this is just our little area, Central DuPage Hospital, and a few other little hospitals around, but mostly CDH. So you can imagine if I got lots of stories, and the ones that I included in the book are ones that gave me goosebumps or maybe come to tears and with emotion. And so you can imagine how many stories there are out there. This is from one hospital. There are 1,000 hospitals in the country. Imagine the hospitals around the world. So there are lots of stories like this. And every one of you, I suspect, has if you think about it, think of a coincidence that happened in your life that got you the job that you wanted to, that you happened to have a conversation just coincidentally. And there are things that happen that you don't realize, and things that you do realize that you could tell someone, but you were hesitant to do so. You now have my permission to tell your story. So, but there are lots of stories like this out there. And I think it just proves that there's something else out there. And you can search for whatever that thing is. But I know there's something else out there too. I had an interesting event. Any other questions? I was trying to get into medical school, and I needed to get organic chemistry. And I had graduated from college with an economics major because I loved economics, but then I decided to go back into medicine, and I had to pick up organic chemistry at night. And there were two schools in Illinois that offered organic chemistry at night, Roosevelt University and Aurora University. And I lived in Sycamore, or in DeKalb. And so I worked in Aurora, and I thought, this is great. I can go to Aurora University, and I picked up a book, and there were lots of books on the bookshelves. So I went to the first class. There were 3 students in the class. And I knew I had to take it that year because I had to get a job, a real job after that. I couldn't be fooling around trying to get into medical school because, again, my grades weren't wonderful and I had an economics background and not a medical background. And so when I decided to close the class, I thought, oh my goodness, I'll never be a successful person. I'll never be a doctor because I can't get into organic chemistry. Then I realized it was available at Roosevelt downtown. So the next day, instead of going to work, I zipped down to Roosevelt University and went to the registrar and I said, I'd like to get into organic chemistry. And she said, I'm very sorry, there's one class that's filled. And then we opened up a second class because there was so much of a demand, and now we have 10 people on the waiting list. And I said, well, you don't understand. If I don't get into organic chemistry, I'll be a failure in life, and I won't be a doctor, and I have to get a real job. And she said, everyone that's in this line is in the same position that you are, and they've got that same story. And I said, well, you have to tell me who makes the final decision on organic chemistry. Who can tell me, who can get me into that class? And she said, the only person is the professor. And I said, well, where does the professor live? And I was desperate. And she said, on the third floor, go up to the third floor, room 302, or whatever the room was. And so I ran up there, there's a room full of students. And they were all looking for the same thing. And so I must have looked like the saddest sap in the world to the secretary. And I said, I've got to talk with the professor just for 2 minutes. And she said, if it's just for 2 minutes, go to the anteroom and then wait for him. There's a chair, and he's taught the two professors that are teaching the two classes that we opened up are talking together. So I went to the anteroom, I sat down, and everyone else gave me a bad, dirty look, as I was passing everyone and going ahead of everyone else that wanted to talk with the professor too about the same thing. So I sat in the anteroom and I heard the two professors talking. The one said to the other one, I don't know where we're going to get the books. We've got a new class. We opened up we have 30 kids in the class. There are no books. The publisher has no books. There are no books at any of the universities in the area. And we're really in trouble because the class starts tomorrow and we've got no books. And in those days, there weren't computers and things like that you could, study online. And so the professors then separated, and the one signaled for me to come in. And he shook my hand. I don't think he even made eye contact. He knew what I was coming in about. And I said, I need to be a success in life, and I won't be a success if I don't get into organic chemistry because I need to get into medical school. And he said, I'm very sorry. He gave me the same line that the registrar gave me, and that was, we have, it's 10 kids on the waiting list, and everyone has the same story that you do. And then I got desperate, okay? And this was a desperate time. I'm not normally this bold, and I said to him, if I can get you the books, will you let me in the class? And my heart was like this. He all of a sudden, he looked up at me, and he made eye contact, and his eyebrows went up. And I thought, I've struck a bell here. And it took a long time. And finally, he said to me, can you get me 30? And I said, more. And it took a long time, and by this time, my heart was in my throat. And he said, you're in. I got into medical school. I got into that organic chemistry class. I passed it. I didn't get the best grade in class, but I passed the class. They got the books because I told them where they were. They had more than enough books. What is the likelihood that I would be there at that very time when they were talking about that and where only I could help them and only they could help me? That's beyond a coincidence. That was something that directed me to that very place at the very time they were talking about those books. And I didn't realize that until I wrote this book. I thought this was just a nice coincidence. But after writing the book, I realized there's something more to it than that. It was more than a coincidence. And that allowed me to get into medical school, and otherwise, had I not done that, I wouldn't have been a doctor. So that changed my whole life, that one little coincidence. Look for those coincidences in your life. They exist, little ones and big ones like that.
Is there any type of person or any type of religion that has a greater preponderance of miracles, or is it pretty evenly spread out?
I don't know that for sure, broadly, but I can tell you what the doctors that I talk with, and the doctors were all different kinds of religions. Some had no religion at all. Some didn't believe in anything until they had this incredible experience. So it was all different. Some were very religious. Some had weren't religious at all. As a matter of fact, one surgeon that had an experience with a person that had kept telling her that he was going to show her that there was life after death, and she kept saying, I'm sure that's the case. Well, he ultimately died, and the morning he died, he appeared to her when she was walking into the hospital, and with a smile on his face that he had accomplished his major life goal, that is to show her that there was life after death. And she believed after that. So It was no, and all different religions. So there's no.
Is there a type of person that it happens to, like a more pious person or that
No,
kind of thing?
no.
It's everybody.
Some were a little bit rough on the you know, on the edges. Yeah. So no, it wasn't necessarily pious or not pious or anything. It happens to everyone. Dr. Heim, for example, the one that found the skier, doesn't go to any church at all. I don't think he has a religion, but he believes in there's something higher than him, and this certainly helped solidify that belief. Other questions?
Are you chronicling the patient's perspective along with the doctor's?
I am, because there are some great patient stories. I had one patient that said to me, you know, that reminds me of a story that happened to me, and I thought it was just a coincidence, but now after talking with you, maybe it isn't. And he said, my daughter was in New York, and she was going to be an internship for 3 months in New York City. And this person wasn't very well off, and he said, we really couldn't afford an apartment because the apartments are incredibly expensive in downtown New York. So we were going to give up the internship, and she would not be able to finish the school and so forth. And he said that night he had a dream about a friend that he hadn't seen for about 25 years. He said it was the strangest dream that his friend was in that dream. And again, he had not thought about him for a long time. Well, interesting, guess what happened the next day? The friend called him. And guess where the friend lived? New York City. He said, I wanted to tell you that I've been very successful in the business. I'm now retired. I live in downtown New York City. I live in an apartment that has 4 bedrooms, and I'm just kind of lonely. And he said, would you consider having my daughter stay with you for 3 months? He said, I'd love to. I'll pay for all of her food. She can do it for free. And give me her name, and I'll call her. And so that worked out really well. He said, I thought that was a coincidence, but after hearing some of your stories, that wasn't a coincidence. There was something else going on there. So lots of patients now have told me crazy stories like that of things that have happened to them that they thought were maybe coincidental, or maybe they didn't. And so, like I said, I think lots of people, almost everyone, has had some interesting, unusual story where they've been touched by something above.